Well, why are we talking about mental health, you might wonder, here? Well, for a very good reason. First of all, Psalms 144:15 says, and I'll quote from the New World Translation, "Happy is the people whose God is Jehovah." So that indicates if a person's God is Jehovah, he will be happy. If his God isn't Jehovah, he may not be happy. But it does indicate that if he's miserable, certainly his God couldn't be Jehovah. Matthew 5:3 says, also from the New World Translation, "Happy are those conscious of their spiritual need." And so if a person is conscious of his spiritual need, he will be happy, Jesus assures us. Luke 12:37 says, "Happy are those servants who, when the master on arriving finds watching or ready." In other words, if we're waiting for the master to come, we will be happy. So since this is a problem among Jehovah's Witnesses, it may say something about their spirituality. It may say something about what God they are serving or what God they are following. Because the Scriptures do indicate that if people are following God in the right way, they will be happy as a whole. Thus, there is evidence, if we look at the situation, that the mental health of Jehovah's Witnesses speaks something of their faith, or lack thereof, or their relationship with God and Christ. Let's now look at psychiatrists for a few minutes and see what they do. Psychiatrists have an important tool they use in diagnosing mental illness. To give you a parallel, let's look at medical doctors for a few minutes. They also have a few important tools. Probably the most famous are a thermometer and a stethoscope. The medical doctor knows, with the thermometer, that the higher the disease process, the higher the temperature. If you have a lot of germs in your body, the temperature will raise. Actually, to kill the germs off, it's going to boil them to death, trying to heat them so they can't survive in the body. That's how it kills the germs. And the more germs there are there in the body, the higher the temperature, because we know the body is working harder to kill more of them, so it raises the temperature higher. So a doctor can tell a lot about a person's physical health just by sticking a thermometer in their mouth. The same thing with a stethoscope. It can tell a great deal about the condition of the person by listening to the heart. Well, psychiatrists likewise have a tool they use, and that tool is a simple question. And that question is, are you happy? And if a person says, no, I'm miserable, that's the chief indicator we have of mental health. If the person is happy, and really is happy, and says he's happy, and is honest, we can't really say he's sick. Because mental health doesn't look at any disease process in the body tissue. It primarily looks at, are you happy? So let's ask that question of Jehovah's Witnesses. Are you, as a Jehovah's Witness, happy? Well, my own experience in working with hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses and in associating intimately with the congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses for over 20 years, as a whole, my experience is, with few exceptions, they are miserable. And they know they are. Okay? But are they going to tell you that? Obviously not. You're not going to know this unless you spend a lot of time with them, unless they see you as one of them. And then they're not likely to sit down and tell you their problems. Now, I had the advantage or disadvantage, I don't know what it is, but I've done therapy with witnesses for 5 or 6 years. So naturally they're going to me for help. So naturally they're going to tell me what's wrong, what their problems are. That's why they're paying me to help them, to find out what their problems are. And so they know they have to be honest with me and tell me how they feel so I can help them. I can't help them unless they tell me what is wrong. It's like going, you go to a doctor and the doctor says, well, how do you feel? And the patient says, it's none of your business. You couldn't help the patient very much. So they know that. And so because of my position, I've been able to find out that a large number of Jehovah's Witnesses are very unhappy people. They're miserable. And usually Jehovah's Witnesses in high positions, circuit overseers, district overseers, are aware of this. They in time become aware of this. What are some of the problems they have? Well, I could go on and list all kinds of diseases, mental diseases, but essentially the main problems are depression, feeling of helplessness, worry, doubt. Conflicts in the congregations are common. The elders tend to try to enforce very rigid rules, extremely rigid rules. I can tell a few years ago wire rims were condemned, even though Noah wore them for 20 years. And if you came in the Kingdom Hall with wire rims, you were set for a conference. And he would sit you down, and, well, brother, now we noticed that you're wearing wire rims. You're falling out of the truth. We're concerned about this, brother. We think that you need help. And so it does get to be absurd after a while. And as you may imagine, trying to enforce this much rigidity, this much conformity, it creates problems. It creates a lot of problems. And if you really believe the Watchtower Society is God's organization, if you feel that Christ is using this organization, well, the elder is kind of God's friend or God's representative. And in essence, what he says is almost like God saying it. And so if an elder says you're immature because you wear wire-rimmed glasses, that's like God saying you're immature because you wear wire-rimmed glasses. And that causes people to become depressed. My God, I'm a bad person. I'm terrible. And naturally they feel guilty, worry, doubt, and so on. Of course, witnesses do try to paint a picture to outsiders that they are happy people. They do try to leave this impression because it sells the organization. They're very concerned with selling the organization. And that's essentially what they sell. They want to paint a good picture of this organization. They're selling the Watchtower. And to do this, they will naturally want to convey to people that, well, we're all happy, so thus join the organization. One Watchtower magazine said this, and I quote, "Jehovah's Witnesses are the happiest people in the world and have less need for psychiatrists than any other people." End of quote. So that's what they say. By the way, this was said about 10 years ago. They haven't said that recently. I wonder why they haven't. Maybe they're more aware or more honest for some reason. And my conclusions that there is emotional problems come from a variety of sources. I've looked at all the literature, trying to find what other psychiatrists, psychologists, researchers have to say. I've talked to hundreds of JWs. I've talked to Schroeder about this. I've talked to Covington about this. I've talked to a number of high-level officials in the Watchtower, and they recognize it's a problem. They're aware of it. But, of course, they typically respond, we don't know what to do about it. And so I proceed to give them a few suggestions, which they refuse to proceed to reject, typically. In essence, they seem to want to solve the problem, but don't really want to look at it and try to solve it. Well, you might ask, how do they rationalize this? In other words, how can they go around believing we have the truth, God is with us, He is using us, and yet we're all miserable? Well, this is how they rationalize this. And if you think about it, it's kind of neat. It does make sense, even though the conclusions are fallacious or almost foolish, but it does make sense. First of all, they believe that they are God's people. Everyone inside of the Watchtower Society is God's people, person. We're all God's people. Everyone outside of the Watchtower Society is of Satan. Okay? Everyone outside is of Satan, the devil. They are all not God's people. So therefore, they reason, logically, Satan would try to do everything he can to be nice to those outside of the Watchtower because he has all of them. He's ensnared all of them. So he's going to be nice to everyone outside of the Watchtower. And so he's going to serve, really, them. He's going to try hard so that they have a good time in life. He's going to try hard so that people outside of the Watchtower Society enjoy life, they reason. On the other hand, everyone inside of the Watchtower is of God. Satan has lost them. Those are all Satan's failures, they believe. So therefore, Satan is going to try to make everyone inside of the Watchtower Society miserable, they feel. So here you have Satan trying hard to make everybody outside of the Watchtower comfortable and happy and contented, and everyone within the Watchtower Society miserable. And so in essence, the reality that witnesses are generally unhappy and people outside, they feel, are possibly happier, this in itself is proof that we're God's people. We must be, because Satan's making us miserable and they're happy. Can you follow that reasoning? It's creative. It is logical, and they believe it. I think if you ask them this way, they would probably say, well, no, not quite. But in conversation, you can see that they really believe it. On the other hand, they teach the opposite. They really teach the opposite. They teach that the only people who are really happy are those in God's organization. And they feel those outside are miserable because they're not in God's organization, which, of course, is a contradiction of what we just talked about. And I don't know how they answer this contradiction. I think it's somewhat upsetting, and I don't want to upset them too much, and so I don't push it. But I think they should at least think about it. But some of them are aware of the serene contentment that many Christians have. And this causes them, to some extent, to be somewhat paranoid. And psychiatrically, the most common mental illness among Jehovah's Witnesses is what is known as paranoia schizophrenia. And most studies show that that is at least 4 times higher among the witnesses than among non-witnesses. And you can understand this, how they would become paranoid. They would see these people outside seem to be happy. I'm not, I know that. You seem to be. So then you start talking to me, and what you say may make sense. So how should I react? Frightened. That's how they react. Because what you're saying is what I'm believing and doing and acting upon is wrong. And that's frightening to a person. It's frightening to feel that you're wrong. And so how can you respond to that? You can change your beliefs, or you can go crazy and become mentally ill, become paranoid, and not refuse to accept what other people have to say. And this, of course, is a common response. Now, looking at why they're mentally ill and some of the ramifications of this problem, first of all, the witnesses point to the worst in everyone else. They're constantly looking at the worst in everything else. When something happens in what they call Christendom somewhere, they immediately grab onto that and exaggerate it. I know when I was involved with the witnesses, we constantly talked about food shortages, people getting laid off, droughts here and there, and we were constantly worried. We're going to have food tomorrow? Constantly worried about droughts, constantly worried about earthquakes. And when something like this would happen, we'd all talk about it. All right? What would you expect from this? What would you expect from such a negative view of everything? Well, what you expect is people become somewhat depressed. They talk about negative things all the time. The negative things in the world and the negative things elsewhere. And it is very depressing. And I know I would come home from the meetings many times very depressed, talking about all of these depressive things. So naturally, focusing upon the worst in everybody else and everything else is rather depressing. And it can frighten many witnesses. Many younger witnesses, school age, preschool age, have nightmares of what they see, what they hear. You know, when parents talk about all the tragedy in the world all the time, how do you expect young people to react? They react very frightened, very insecure. Secondly, in pointing to the worst of everybody else, they give a distorted view of everyone else. They become very suspicious of everyone else. They tend to feel everyone else is out to get them in one way or another. They feel that everyone else is bad. They tend to feel that most non-witnesses, or many at least, are homosexual, sexually promiscuous, thinking only about material things, are really the lowest sort of people. So then how do they behave towards everyone else? If you felt that everyone out there was either a homosexual, dishonest, a murderer, a cheat, or everything else that was bad, you'd be pretty careful about associating with those people. So what happens is this feeling of other people causes them to isolate themselves. They live in a world of their own. They live in fear of everyone else. They live in constant fear of everyone else. And that's really hard if you think about it. It's hard to feel that me and my friends at the Kingdom Hall, and I wonder about them sometime, are all good people. But everybody outside is all bad, trying to get me. And so therefore you really can't enjoy other people. You really can't be the Good Samaritan. You really can't help other people. You're afraid of them. You're afraid they're going to ensnare you in something. in all kinds of things. And so there's a fear of other people. And so there's, in psychiatric terms, an alienation or an anomie. There's a separation. And in psychiatric parlance, those are very important factors in developing mental illness. If you have plenty of friends, if you can satisfy this need for company, for affiliation, for association, to feel at one with man, if you can satisfy this need, you will go a long ways towards avoiding mental illness. And the witnesses can't satisfy this need. Now, it would be ideal if they could satisfy this need in the congregation. In other words, okay, everybody outside there hates me, and I hate them, but at least if I had my brothers in the congregation, I'd be all right. I'd have friends somewhere. But what happens? What happens when you have a list of rules that travel without end? When you condemn incredible things, like calling a bulletin board a bulletin board. That's improper because the Catholic Church calls a bulletin board a bulletin board. So therefore you can't call it a bulletin board because the Church does. If the Church does, it must be bad. So therefore you have to call it an information board. And if you slip up one day and call it a bulletin board, people will look at you and they'll feel you're immature, you're not very well grounded in the truth, and you must be falling out of the truth. And that's hard. And so what happens? So you have people in the congregation going around, in essence, condemning each other, suspicious of each other. And you're bound to slip up one day and call a bulletin board a bulletin board. And what happens? Then they feel you're immature, they stay away from you, they watch association. So in essence, you have a situation where they as a whole cannot satisfy these needs in the congregation. They can't feel brother and sister with those in the congregation. They can't feel at one with those people. It's hard for them to respect each other because they're constantly breaking all these minor taboos. And a few of the major ones, too, occasionally. And so they cannot satisfy these needs. So what happens? What happens is they feel alone in the world. They feel, I'm the only one, I'm all by myself. And that's a very hard feeling to live with. And that feeling, that condition, is incredibly important in developing mental illness. People who have a lot of friends don't tend to develop mental illness. People who don't have many friends are those who develop mental illness. And that's a law of behavior. Every psychiatrist recognizes that. It's as if God said, you must have friends. You need friends. It's like He gave laws regarding food. If you don't eat after 6 months, what's going to happen? You're going to die. If you don't have friends, if you live by yourself and isolate yourself from other people for 6 months, you'll die the same way. The same thing will happen. We know that's true. We have all kinds of scientific terms to describe that. Marasmus is one common term they use. You literally wither away without friends. Some of you are wondering, now, what about a hermit? And they don't have friends, and they seem to do all right. Well, they do all right because they make up friends. They have imaginary friends. They talk to them, they have fun with them, they play ball with them. Or they have animals, and the animals become the friends. So it's not that they're living without people, it's that they've made their own friends. Or they have animals. And animals can be pretty good friends. It can, to some degree, replace people. Not fully, and that's why hermits tend to behave rather strange after a while. But it does, to some extent, replace that need. It's like you can live on bread and water for 6 months. You may not be extremely healthy, but you can do it. It satisfies that need. Well, the same way with a hermit. Living with his animals and his imaginary friends satisfies that need. And that's why I'm sure you're all aware the person who becomes mentally ill talks to himself. That's a very common trait. At least it's a stereotype of mentally ill people. They talk to themselves. But why are they doing that? Because they really don't have friends. Therefore, they need to make up that lack. How do they make it up? They have imaginary friends. And believe it or not, talking to yourselves helps people from going further insane. It helps people for a while. Why? Well, it satisfies that need. It's hard for us to find that need in the brain. We can find the area which facilitates vision, the occipital area of the brain. We can find that. But it's hard for us to find the part of the brain which causes you to need friends. But it's there. It must be there because we have that need, which all psychiatrists recognize. So isolation is a very important factor which influences the development of mental illness among witnesses. There's another factor which enters in, and that is, in time, they become afraid to talk to each other. If I sit down with you, we're both Jehovah's Witnesses, I sit down with you and tell you my problems, what may happen? If I tell you I secretly desire to wear wire rims, what may happen? Or another bugaboo for a long time was white shirts. If I secretly desire, colored shirts, if I secretly desire to wear a light blue shirt, and I tell you, you may listen and you may understand and help me, but you might not. You might run and tell the elders of my sin. And what may end up happening? My sin, or my contemplated sin, may become a subject of gossip in the congregation. And this commonly happens. It may not happen with the first people I confide in, the first person, but the second person, third, at least, it will happen. All right? So I confide in you. You listen and seemingly understand, or you may condemn. And then that becomes a subject of congregational gossip. What's going to happen? I'm never going to confide into another witness again. I'm not going to say anything to any witness. So what happens? Again, isolation. Isolation. Now you might ask, we've talked a little bit about why the mental illnesses rate. Now you might say, well, how do we know for sure it's high? What scientific studies have you seen or have you read which show it's high? Well, I'll recite 4, which I'm aware of. The first was done by Dr. Spencer. He's an Australian psychiatrist. What he did is took every admission to several mental hospitals in Australia, and he found out the number of those that were Jehovah's Witnesses. And he asked them if they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And my feeling is, and I wrote to him and he agreed about this, my feeling is that many witnesses will say, I'm not. They tend to do this. And I know this is true because the community where I worked in, I knew all the witnesses. And occasionally one would be committed in the hospital. And I would look on his record, religion, and it would say Protestant or none. He would not admit. Well, they don't want to admit. They're willing to protect the organization even if it hurts themselves. And so if they're admitted to a mental hospital, they're not going to admit in many cases that I'm a witness. So in spite of that problem, he found that paranoia and schizophrenia was 4 times higher among JWs as among the population as a whole. And that is, as I wrote to him, probably an underestimate, because a lot of witnesses probably did not admit that they were witnesses. He also found for all diagnoses of schizophrenia, the mental illness rate was about twice as high among witnesses as among the population as a whole. And as I mentioned before, this is a conservative estimate. So another psychiatrist, Janner, he's Swedish, he did a study of all of those who were imprisoned because of objection to military service. And this is probably a good sample of JWs, because in essence you're getting everyone who was, every male, between the age of 18 and probably 25, 26. So you have a good sample of witnesses. And he psychiatrically examined all of them. And he found that of the COs, all COs he looked at, 85% were JWs. Of this, he found that the mental illness rate was about 40 times higher among the witnesses than among the population as a whole. That's his estimate. Now, with all statistics, of course, we have to be careful on taking them at face value. They're always estimates. You can look at the number of people who left the Watchtower since 1970, and you can come up with a nice figure of 700,000. Well, that's an estimate. There are problems with that. It's probably high. There's no doubt about that. But you have to be careful about throwing numbers around. So be careful about throwing this figure 40 times higher around. There are undoubtedly a few witnesses who tried to malinger, who tried to act insane so possibly they could get out of the institution, so they could be put on hospital status, which isn't as bad. There are undoubtedly many others who they rated as insane, who, for various reasons, tried to show themselves as insane. There were some probably who, because of the trauma of being imprisoned, had a hard time and showed at that time that they were insane. But in real life, outside, they probably would behave somewhat normally outside. So that estimate is probably high. But the point is, it clearly says it's much higher, the mental illness rate, among witnesses than among the population as a whole. Another study by Prescore in 1949, again he examined all JWs who were imprisoned because of their objection to the Selective Service Law. He found of those, 16% were on hospital status. In other words, of the total number of JWs, 16% were in the hospital for one reason or another. Of these 16%, 44% were diagnosed as psychotic. 50% had medical problems, like they're blind or deaf or some other problem. So in other words, Prescore found that 8% of the total number of JWs was diagnosed as psychotic. Psychotic means you are legally insane, although a legal term is not a psychiatric term, but the two can be equated. They're similar. 8% means that the mental illness rate, according to the study, is about 40 times higher, again, same number, among JWs than the population as a whole. The last study by Rylander, he was, I believe, also Swedish, and he again examined witnesses who were imprisoned because of their conscientious objection. And he found again the mental illness rate was approximately 32 times higher than the population. So every study that we've looked at says the mental illness rate is higher. And I'm not aware of a single study which says the mental illness rate is the same or lower. So the research says it's higher. Now let's go back to some of the reasons why it's high. One common reason is, even though Jehovah's Witnesses are dedicated to the Watchtower Society, the Watchtower Society doesn't seem to be very dedicated to Jehovah's Witnesses. They seem to be really callous regarding witnesses. There's dozens of examples I could give you. One was, I worked in the clinic at one of the Watchtower assemblies, and one of the witnesses who was working with me, who was a medical doctor, related to me that at a previous assembly 3 infants died of sunstroke. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but what happens is, on a warm day, you put a child out in the sun, and the child would dehydrate, young children. The child's asleep. And what's going to happen? Well, the child will die. It'll die in its sleep. The mother goes off and talks for 3 hours, leaving the child there in the sun. Well, the child hasn't complained. He hasn't woken up. Must be okay. Well, older children can wake up and complain. But younger children, they can dehydrate and die in the sun. Well, 3 infants died at this assembly. So the witness I was working with was concerned about this, and so we thought we would go to the administration and we would tell the administration if they could just make an announcement. You know, mothers, be careful, it's hot out here, it's 90 degrees, don't put your infants in the sun and leave them there for 2 hours. Please put them in the shade or something which would in essence warn the mothers of this possibility. And you know, they refused. They said, we can't spend precious microphone time with personal announcements. That's what they said. They refused. They refused to make the announcement, which to us was pretty upsetting. By the way, that person who complained, he later on left the society and found Christ a short time ago. I think it's partially because of that experience. And this is so common. There's so many complaints about the society. You write them a 10-page letter. 6 months later, they send you a card. We received your letter, thank you. I know witnesses who spent years on doing research. And, you know, they need people to do research. If you study their exegesis, they tend to be somewhat far-sighted. That's why they have to change a lot. If they come out with something, and it sounds good, and it seems pretty valid, it seems logical, and they publish it, and they find, hey, that's way off. It's way off. So they have to change it a few months later. And I think a lot of that is they're not trying to, at least in some of these cases, necessarily deceive people. I think it's just short-sightedness. They don't have time to do research. So they do a little bit of research, and hey, that sounds logical. And they type up an article, and they publish it. And then they do some more research and say, oh, it's wrong. So they have to come out with something different. They have to change. And so I think they need people, or at least you think that they would see this. They need people to do research. So I've known of 4 or 5 witnesses who have spent years doing research, thorough research. They'll type a 60-page treaty, send it into the Watchtower Society, 60-page paper, And the Watchtower Society says, thank you, we received your letter. When we get time, we'll look at it. Don't acknowledge it. You think they would sit down and study it carefully and at least try to respond to it. If it was wrong, they should say it's wrong. It's wrong. Thank you, dear brother. We received your 20-page paper, your 40-page paper. We certainly appreciate you spending the time doing the research. We feel it's wrong for these reasons. You think they would say that? They sometimes do, but they usually don't. So how would you feel if you spent a lot of time, you're trying to be helpful, and you really did some research, a lot of research. You sent in your conclusions and they say, thank you, brothers, we'll look at it when we get a chance. I know that happened to one witness, and he sent in another letter and said, dear brothers, if you were a baker and discovered there was poison in your bread, would you say, well, we'll take it out when we get time? That's what he said to him. In other words, I think I found some poison in the teaching. If it's really poison, you should take it out now. If it's not poison, let me know so I can take it out of me. But let me know. And I don't recall the response. I think they said, yeah, we'll get to it. We're very busy. They typically say that. We're very busy. And we don't have time. Well, that's upsetting. And I could go on and relate dozens of examples where the Watchtower Society was really not at all responsive to witnesses' needs. We had one witness who was at Bethel for 3 years, and as you can imagine, when you take a lot of 18-year-old kids off the streets and put them on multi-million-dollar presses, there's accidents, there's injuries. They're not trained to run a press. Well, that happens quite a bit. I know we had one witness who he was repairing the elevators. They tend to be very frugal there, which is good, I suppose, but they had the young fellas there repairing the elevator. Well, one was killed, fell on the elevator shaft, was killed. And my response, as well as some people there, what business do you have this kid working on the elevator? He doesn't know how to repair. He doesn't know how to, okay, you can figure it out, and you can tell him, and you can play with it. But you should have someone who knows what he's doing working on that. Another witness, he was working on the press, and he got his hand caught in the press, and he lost his hand. You know what their response was? They sent him home. Can't use you anymore. You can't work here anymore. You can't run a press with one hand. So they sent him home with nothing. And that happens many, many times. You've probably read of a couple of similar incidents in Gruss's book. Well, they're very callous to the needs of the typical witness. And there's reasons why. They feel that our job now is to convert as many people as we can. Therefore, individuals don't matter. If you die now, that's all right. You'll be resurrected next year. So it doesn't really matter that much. The key is to get people into the organization. Because if you've done that, they're saved forever. Once you're in there, it doesn't matter if you die, because you'll be resurrected next year. And so there tends to be a callousness regarding life, regarding their own people. And then, as I mentioned, there's the constant concern with the picky stuff. The white shirts was an issue for about 4 years. The wire rim glasses was an issue for about a year. Hair has been a perpetual issue. It said that witnesses talk about dress more than anything else. And I think statistically that's true. If you sat around with a tape recorder and recorded their conversations, you would find that most of the time, statistically, or at least a good percent of the time, they're talking about dress. And it's mostly critical of what other people are wearing. They're very preoccupied with this. I suppose partially because they're very preoccupied with an image that they feel they're trying to present. And the image has been for a long time ultra-short hair. They feel that's very important. And it's interesting. I had a psychiatrist mention this to me at one of the hospitals. He says, you know, people with short hair are either, he said, mentally retarded or Jehovah's Witnesses. I thought that was interesting. And he had no idea of my background and my interest in the witnesses. And of course there's a reason why they generally keep children who are retarded with short hair. And that's because they tend to get food and gum and other things in their hair. They don't tend to be very neat with placing their gum in various places. And so the hair is cut short for their own safety. It's easy to keep it clean. That's why. And then there's another problem, and that is you continually read in the Society's publications ideas that are completely foolish. Give you an example. And I'm aware that Schroeder originated this idea because I talked to him about it. And this is the idea that the literal source of one's feelings and attitudes and likes and dislikes is not the mind, but the heart they feel. As they feel when the Bible says that your heart is what reads a man, they feel that's literal. That your literal heart is where you think. You don't think in your brain, they feel. You just store things away in your brain. It goes down to the heart, and your heart does the thinking. Which was New Light a few years ago. 5 years ago, I remember at one assembly we had a big heart. Someone stressed, now is this just a pump? No, it's not a pump. This is where feelings emanate, and ideas emanate, and spirituality emanates, and so on. Well, there's one problem with that, and that is surgeons, such as Dr. Dubray. They have taken the literal heart out of the body and replaced it with a plastic heart or another person's heart. Now, if the heart was the source of feelings, and if you took the heart out and replaced it with a plastic heart, you wouldn't have any feelings anymore, I would think. But what happens? They've done this with animals. There's a lot of research with animals on this. When they replace the physical heart with a steel pump, what happens? The person thinks and acts and feels the same way. His feelings don't change. But of course, for a while, witnesses taught if I got a heart transplant of a criminal, I would be a criminal. I would take on that person's personality. There's just no evidence for that. It's foolishness. So they came out with that, and that was New Light, and witnesses talked about that for 2 years. They haven't talked about that in 3 or 4 years. I think because someone let them know that, hey, that's just totally wrong. It's just totally fallacious. You can't be saying things like that. You lose your credibility. So they said, well, yeah, I guess it isn't very bright. And so they stopped talking about it. They haven't yet come out and said we're wrong. They sometimes do that. They come out and said we're wrong. I remember they used to teach Christ didn't have a beard until he had shaved himself. And he used to push that for several years and came out about 10 years ago, well, we're wrong. He had a beard. I don't know how he'd know, but he had a beard. We're all wrong. He had a beard now. You have to change. And so I don't suppose it makes a lot of difference if he did or didn't, but they changed. And that caused a lot of people to change their feelings toward the society. But they haven't come out and changed regarding the heart issue. But I imagine in time they're going to have to. The social problems, though, is critical. Witnesses say among themselves, there's a cliche, you move into a new congregation and you love everyone at first. But after 6 months you find everyone's faults, plural, pardon me, and then you no longer like anyone anymore. And they find out your faults after 6 months, and they no longer like you anymore. And if you think about it, a religion that stresses works, salvation by works, naturally they're constantly looking to works. If you have long hair, you won't survive Armageddon, you'll be destroyed forever. So naturally, they're very concerned about works, very concerned about these outward appearances. So naturally, if you wear wire-rimmed glasses or other such things, you're obviously lost. And so I better not associate with you because your badness may contaminate me, causing me to be lost. And thus I have to be leery about you. And they're constantly stressing, be leery about those on the outside. And remember, they say at assemblies, not all of those inside are really Jehovah's Witnesses. So what happens is they look around, maybe he's not really a Jehovah's Witness. So they don't trust each other. They're suspicious of each other. And they're constantly suspicious, of course, of anyone who's different. And if you're different in some way, you're going to be singled out as, well, maybe he's not quite a Christian. Maybe he's not a good Jehovah's Witness. And the differences could include such things as you have higher education or lower education. They're very suspicious of college graduates. There's not too many among them, but they're very suspicious of college graduates. They're also very suspicious of people with low levels of education, ironically. There's pressure for everyone to have a high school diploma and no more, and no less. They're rigid on that. Although if you only have 10th grade education, it's usually all right. There's not too much pressure. If you have a 3rd grade education, well, that's a different story. If you have a doctor's degree, that's tragic to them. They have a hard time dealing with that. And you can see why. It's a threat. It's a threat to them. Anyone with education is a threat. And so they have a hard time dealing with those people. And one of the things they feel they should do is they should humble you. They're preoccupied with humbling people, especially people who have done well. I understand Teresa Graves has a hard time with this. I don't know if she's still with the witnesses, but she's not? Someone says, Oh. But I imagine she would have a very hard time with this. The first thing people would do is they say, now humble yourself. I know you're an actress and on TV, but you're just like the rest of us. Try not to put yourself above us. And I imagine she would have a hard time because of people trying to humble her. The same way it is with people with good educations or people with good jobs. They're preoccupied with humbling you. And what does the humbling amount to? Putting you down. They constantly put down wealth in the platform. Of course, there's legitimate arguments to put down wealth, but they're constantly degrading wealth. In essence, saying if you're wealthy, you can't be a Christian. You must be bad, or almost always bad. The same thing with education. The same thing with prominent jobs, good jobs. It's constantly degrading that. And what happens if you happen to be a witness and happen to be wealthy? You're going to have a hard time with everyone humbling you. You'll be so humble you'll have an inferiority complex. And that's exactly what happens with people who are different. And then there's constant striving for status within the congregation. You see, they cannot achieve status outside of the congregation. They can't work for promotions. That's wrong. They can't get a good job. That's wrong. They can't do well in sports. That's wrong. They can't sing. That's wrong. They can't perform in front of an audience. That's wrong. You're exalting yourself when you should be exalting Jehovah. You can't do well as an artist. That's wrong. You're exalting your own works. You should exalt Jehovah's works. They're constantly criticizing whatever ways that people have to exercise normal needs. We all have a need to be liked, to be respected. We all like to do nice things. We all like to create nice things. If you can sing, you love to sing in front of an audience, don't you? You love to sing in front of 500 people and have them enjoy that. We love that. We all need attention. Children aren't the only one that need attention. We all do. Why do you think people drive Cadillacs? No one needs a Cadillac. The only thing you need is 2 legs and or a bike. No one needs a Cadillac. Why do we drive Cadillacs? The only reason you drive a Cadillac is because you can drive around and say, look at me. Wow, look at me. Look who I am. It's the only reason you need one. You don't need a Cadillac. You might need a car. You can drive a Chevrolet. Chevrolets are pretty luxurious. If you look at the prices, I guess a normal car today would be what? Pinto? That's all you need. And so we like to do things that we can achieve attention. There's nothing wrong with that need. To me, the Scriptures sanction that need if it's not carried to an extreme. The Scriptures stress that a worker is worthy of his wages. If you're a good singer and have a good voice, can perform well, you're worthy of your wages. If the audience claps, you deserve that. That's your wages. You're getting paid for singing. That's it. You deserve that. You should get that. Well, the witnesses don't tend to feel that way. They tend to feel that the only one who earns wages is the Watchtower Society. All glory should go to the Watchtower Society. That's what they feel. And if you have some talent, they pressure you to, well, now, brothers, you can develop your singing ability. You can become an artist in the New World. Now, let's serve Jehovah. Let's give all glory to the Watchtower Society. And a lot of witnesses give up their careers. I knew one witness who had a chance to go to the Olympics. And they convinced him not to. This commonly occurs. You're bringing glory to yourself and your nation. Give glory to Jehovah. Don't go to the Olympics. So he gave it up. He didn't go. That happens quite a bit. So what happens? So you have people with what they call frustrated ego needs. They have no place to satisfy their egos. They have no place to walk around and say, look at me, people. Look how nice I am. Look at what things I've done. They have no place to satisfy this normal need except in the congregation. Ego needs. So what's going to happen? There's going to be status conflicts. There's going to be power struggles. There's going to be everyone trying to be an elder. And that term, they don't just say an elder. They say he is an elder. There's a lot of prestige in that. And they fight like crazy to become elders. They constantly, well, you know, I heard that Brother Jones doesn't study his watchtower every week. I don't think that he would be qualified as an elder, but I study my watchtower every week. So, brothers, I would appreciate you take that into consideration when the appointments for elders are made. There's constant talk that way. And then when a person becomes an elder, there's constant pressure to shoot him down. Because if there's 20 elders, you have less status. If there's 3, you have more status. So I'm an elder. These 19 other people are elders. If I can remove them, I'm more important. And so that's what happens. Same thing with pioneering. Constantly, people, they tout their own status. I am again, the same emphasis, pioneer. They stress that. And you know after 10 minutes who's the pioneer. They walk, hi, I'm Sister Jones, a pioneer. And the society is aware of this. And the society says, now, brothers, if you're an elder or pioneer, you're just a servant. So they proceed to put down pioneers or elders. But yet, they know the hierarchy in the congregation is such where that status is important. They know that status is important. And so naturally, they still strive to be such. Now, looking at the things that are condemned, I could probably go on, and I don't want to bore you, but I'll list you 20 things that are condemned. All holidays, birthdays, Christmas, Easter, Mother's Day, St. Patrick's Day, you name it, they're all condemned. Saying such words as luck, fortunate, etc. are condemned. Higher education is condemned. Reading most non-witness books and magazines are condemned. You read The Watchtower and Awake. They don't actually say you're not supposed to read that. They say, how do you have time after reading The Watchtower and Awake first? And I'm sure you read them first. This is something I got in trouble for. I like books. And I have close to 10,000 books in my house. And when they come in, it blows their mind. They just, what do you read all those books for? Well, I like to read. So I do in my spare time. It's read. And that's part of my job. I have to read. And they don't like that. How do you have time after you read The Watchtower and Awake? Well, The Watchtower and Awake is really 24 pages. It doesn't take that long. I know pretty much what's in it. I can read it in 45 minutes. You can. It's very 6th grade level, by the way, writing style. It doesn't take that long to read it. And so you can read it in a short time. And then, well, don't you meditate on the things? Well, I know them already. I mean, what can I do? And there must be something else you can study. Well, yeah, I've read almost all the Society's publications back to 1879, so how much else I can read? And so, should you waste your time on those worldly things? And so my response was, where do you think that society gets all their material from? They don't make it up. They don't sit down in a room and in a void it comes to them. They have a large library at Bethel. They read things and do research and write articles. Russell himself said, everything that I talk about in these magazines, I got from somebody else. I didn't originate anything, he said. And that's true today. None of the doctrines that witnesses teach are original, except I'm aware of one, the blood issue. It's the only one that's original that I'm aware of. None of the others are. They're all found somewhere else. Although Russell did say, the only thing I did is arrange them in a unique combination. It's my contribution. I took this from here and that from there. The combination is unique, which is true, it is. That's what he did. So he admitted that. And I would mention that, and they would say, well, the material is filtered through theocratic channels. What is good is taken out. And my response was, how do I know that? All right? How do I know that's true? Something else I would use was, now notice in this watchtower here, it quoted from this book. It quoted from this lexicon. It gave the name and the page and the copyright year and the author. What's wrong with me looking that up? And they would say, well, just look that up and don't read anything else. That's how they respond. So you can see with this intellectual stifling, you can see with an organization that all the answers come to the Watchtower Society, and if you question something, there's something wrong with you. You can see how that's emotionally stifling. You can see how that's going to shackle someone. If you shackle someone's mind, do you expect him to stay sane for a long period of time? You expect him to go crazy in time if you shackle his mind. When you say, don't think, just accept. That's inevitable. Well, let me get back to what's condemned. A little offshoot there. Other things, regularly involving yourself in recreation. It's okay once in a while, but if you regularly do it, if you join a bowling team, that's wrong. After-school sports are wrong. Any extracurricular activity is wrong. Any associating with non-JWs except what's absolutely necessary is wrong. Even things like convertibles, two-door hardtops are wrong. You know why? Because you need a car that will serve Jehovah. How do you serve Jehovah? Go out in service. That's what a car's for. What kind of car is best to go out in service in? Station wagon. Or sedans are okay. I would think a station wagon would be better, but sedans are okay. Four-door sedans. Now, they won't kick you out if you have a convertible. They will just, well, he's somewhat immature. That's how they respond. And, of course, there is blood transfusions, there is visiting psychiatrists, visiting psychologists. A few years ago, visiting doctors was discouraged. All doctors except chiropractors and naturopaths and a few others. Smoking is condemned, which I don't approve of smoking at all, but to say that you will lose everlasting life because you smoke, and that's what they say. You lose everlasting life if you smoke. That is a major sin equal to murder, they feel. Which, I understand when they passed that, used to be all right to smoke. Rutherford smoked quite heavily, cigar. When they passed that rule, said you can't smoke anymore, I understand 1% of the witnesses left. They used to say that no one smoked in the society. Organ transplants are wrong. Methadone maintenance is wrong. Missing meetings is wrong. Not going out in service is wrong. Working overtime is wrong. Getting promoted is wrong. Use of terms not approved by the society, such as New Testament, Old Testament, AD, etc., are wrong. Bowing one's head when a non-JW praise is wrong, etc., etc. So with all of these prohibitions, you can see people are uptight. You've got to be careful you don't do something wrong. And there are so many things you can do wrong, naturally you're going to be somewhat uptight. It's very well known among psychiatrists that a rigid, strict, unloving environment is highly conducive to producing mentally ill people. And that's exactly what you have among the witnesses, a rigid, structured, thou shalt not constantly environment. And you can see what a contrast with Christianity, where you're not concerned with salvation by works. That doesn't mean you're not concerned about doing good things. But if you have a vice or do something wrong, you don't have to worry, well, that's it. I'm lost forever because of that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't work to overcome it, but you're not lost because of that vice, which witnesses believe. Looking at something else, and that is a witness growing up. It's very hard for a witness to grow up for many reasons. First of all, one's peers are very important. A witness cannot associate with any peers because they're all of the world, anxious to drag you down into their depths, they feel. So you can't associate with peers. Also, things in the school set you out as different. You can't salute the flag, which is very embarrassing for many children. Here you're in the middle, really. Your mom says, don't salute it. If you do, you'll be damned for eternity. The school says you better salute it. If you don't, you're going to the office. So what does your child do? He's in the middle. And I think, by the way, I'm doing quite a bit of research on the flag salute issue. I think historically that both sides were very unfeeling and the children ended up suffering the most. And they were the ones who really got hurt. I think it's cruel to expel a child from the school, which they did. They threw them out of the school to humiliate them. because they won't salute the flag. And yet the child is only trying to obey his parents. His parents said don't do it. So what do you expect the child to do? I think the children really got a raw deal from this. So you can see how this would affect the child's mental health. So he's constantly isolated from his schoolmates. He constantly sees himself as being a social isolate, cast off, different, and naturally, what kind of personality is he going to develop? He's going to be introverted, shy, to himself, afraid of other people, afraid. He'll be a very fearful child. Now, not all develop this way. There's some who develop a high level of mental adjustment. There are many witnesses who are very mentally adjusted. But there's a lot more who aren't. And, of course, that's the ones we're focusing on. And how some can survive this and come out all right is another question. We'll just look at the problems. So this sets up a vicious circle. I don't like you because you're of the devil. I treat you poorly. I snub you. How are you going to treat me? Poorly. So none of you are going to like me as a witness. So what's going to happen? How am I going to feel regarding other people? Isolated. I'm going to be set off as different, made fun of. And if you're aware of the schools, if you are a teacher or related to the schools, you can see that the kids in the schools in many ways are cruel, openly cruel, and they are openly cruel to JWs. Quite often they're openly cruel. I've seen JWs just burst out into tears and scream in the classroom because of how kids react. Kids are very unfeeling. They don't know what it's like to grow up different as a witness. Now let's try to sum all this up, try to draw some conclusions from all this. I think it should be obvious that witnesses have a lot of problems in their environment. It's difficult to be a witness for a long period of time and be emotionally well adjusted. This is true that witnesses attract people who have problems. This is true they attract those who have emotional problems. But it's also true that the witness environment contributes to this lack of mental adjustment. Now, realizing this, being very aware of this, how should we react towards witnesses? Let me ask you a question. If you were to visit a friend who was in a mental hospital, who was catatonic schizophrenia, who was standing rigidly immobile in a corner and stood that way for months, who has to be fed through a tube or he dies, how would you respond to that person? Would you say something like this, I see you haven't been reading your Bible lately. It won't work. What's the only way you can respond to these people? Here are people like William Glasser. He and many, many others, like Carl Rogers Fields. The main way you can help people who are mentally ill is, I know this word's overused, it doesn't mean too much anymore, but try to think about it, and that is simply love them. Help them. And I don't mean you go up and say, in a mind, to witnesses interpret it this way at least, Jesus loves you. That may be true, and you may want to tell him that. But when you tell that to him, he interprets that as mocking him. And he gets upset because he feels you are mocking me. That's exactly what he feels. So you, in essence, have to convey to him that, I love you, I'm concerned about you, and other Christians are, and Jesus is concerned about you, but you can't tell him that. Because that's, if you walk up to him and say, I love you, with all his worries about homosexuality, he's got problems. And they're very aware of this. You can't say that to them. They're going to misinterpret it. What do you say to them? Well, my suggestion is nothing. Don't say anything to them. Quite often, Christ said nothing. When they ask him, I hear you're the king of the Jews. He responded, yeah, that's what they say. Very simple response. Yeah, that's what you've heard. He wasn't rude, but he knew he couldn't have said anything. He knew he couldn't have talked for 2 hours and would have changed their viewpoint. He knew the only way he was able to change them was by his conduct, by what he did. And he stressed to that. He said, well, Doesn't matter what I say. Look what I did. Am I the Christ? Well, I don't know. Some people say that. You say that. Look what I did. Let what I do judge me. And so how do we respond with Jehovah's Witnesses? Same way. It's by what we do for them. How do we react towards them? And the first mistake Christians invariably get into, they sit there and they argue with them. That's all right if they want to argue and if they'd like to get into that. But most of them don't. And the most you can do is drive them away from Christianity and back into the watchtower. Many I've talked to are ready to leave. And they argue with a Christian for 3 hours and they come right back. That's what typically happens. You don't show him that you love him by arguing with him. The main way you show him your concern is by translating that concern into action. Can I drive you to work? How's things going? Can I mow your lawn? How are things going? Can I tell you something I learned? You may disagree, but that's all right. I'm anxious for your thoughts. And then when he gives you your thoughts, listen to him. I tell my students at the university this. They're usually concerned about finding a boyfriend or girlfriend. I tell them I'm going to give you an ironclad way of getting anyone you want to love you. And they're all ears. And it's a very simple sentence. And that is, if you want a person to like you, sit down with him and ask him questions and listen to him. And I'll guarantee he will love you. He'll love you. Even though you don't agree with what he says, you think it's crazy. Listen to him. Just sit there and, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Now, if he says a lot of things that you clearly disagree with, it may be hard to hold it for an hour. It may be hard to listen to him for a whole hour. You may be tempted to say a few things. Well, that's all right. Say a few things, like maybe 2 sentences, but make them pithy. And if you only say 2 sentences, he'll probably remember those. They'll be on his mind. And he'll think about it. If you say 90, he'll never think about it. He'll just think, boy, that guy was sure argumentative. That guy sure is all wrong, trying to push all this stuff, and trying to tell me that Christ was bodily resurrected. Boy, that guy's crazy. He won't listen to it. So just give him a few points. Just think up a sentence or 2. Give him a few good points. If there wasn't a bodily resurrection of Christ, and stress, I'm not, trying to say there wasn't or was. I just wonder about this point. I really wonder what you have to say about this scripture. Maybe you could tell me. And then give him the point. And then let him think about it. And he'll probably give you a barrage of words, and that's okay. Listen to him. You'll find, by the way, the first hour you talk, he'll do 99% of the talking. That's good. Listen to him. Then you'll find the second hour he'll do 90%. The third hour he'll do 80%. He'll wonder, what do you think? And he'll listen to you, because you've listened to him. Try it. It really does work. My students, 6 months later, they come back and they say, well, I'm engaged. Met this really nice girl. Never thought I could go out with her, but boy, the first day, I don't know why she went out with me, but I guess she had nothing else to do. And I ask her questions. What's your major? How you doing here? Where you from? And I listen to her the whole time. And boy, she loves me. It really does work. It's almost a law of human behavior. And if you listen to them, they'll love you. And there's something else which some of the other speakers may touch on, and that is, many witnesses are already disillusioned. You don't need to give them material to disillusion them. They're already disillusioned. You don't need to add any more. You don't need to pull them away. You need to draw them towards something else. That's what you have to do. And how do you do that? By making that something else attractive. And you don't do that by harping on them. You try to make that something else attractive to them. And there are many who have been pulled away to the extent that they've left. Maybe 700,000, as we mentioned. That's a lot of people. It's a huge number of people. But where are most of those people, do you suppose? I did a study of Jehovah's Witnesses who left. I have well over 100 and some odd witnesses. And I asked them, why did you leave? And where are you now? About 90% were agnostics. Totally disillusioned with all religion. Rejecting everything. Many go way overboard and have orgies and get involved in drugs. Really overboard. Some end up in prisons, believe me. They go that overboard. I'm going to do whatever I want to now, and they go out and do it. Not all, but many do. So where are they now? They're nowhere. Are they better off as an agnostic than a witness? Or better off as a lion? They're better off as, but why work hard to cause them to become from a witness to an agnostic? What have you accomplished there? Nothing. So you need to present the alternative. So that 700,000, whatever it is, witnesses, those are people you should be offering something else. You don't have to knock down the watchtower. They already don't accept it. They've left. You have to offer them something else. And that should be a main concern that we have. I think sometimes we're too preoccupied with knocking down what they have and not replacing it. And we knock it down very easily, quite well. But nothing replaces it. There's nothing else that's built up in place of it. So if I was to summarize all of this, I was to say, should say, realize the problems they have as witnesses. Realize they have a hard life. Many of them are sick people. They're severely depressed. Have a lot of emotional problems. They're not contented inside. They're miserable. As one witness told me. I spent hours and hours listening to how miserable they were. I've worked with dozens of attempted suicides, scores of successful suicides. You have to be pretty miserable to commit suicide. I spent hours and hours and hours, many times, phone calls, 1 o'clock in the morning. I talk until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Many times I lost sleep. Many times, from 7 o'clock to midnight, dealing with these problems. They are there in abundance. Realize this. They may not tell you about their problems. They may not tell you, but realize they're there. Assume they're, you may not be there, but assume they're there. And then react as a concerned person. Show the love that you have to these people. Talk to them. Help them. Show them that you have Christ and are following Christ, are Christians. And they'll respond to this because they don't get it at home, in their spiritual home, in the kingdom hall. It's not there. It's not there, and they know it's not there. By the way, do you know what the number one reason people who left the watchtower told me was? You know why they left the watchtower? So consistent, it's pathetic. Not because of doctrine. Although they may discover some problems in doctrines and may confront the elders with these. The reason they leave is because they're unhappy in the congregation as people. Because of interpersonal conflicts. Because nobody can get along with each other. Because there's constant gossiping, constant conflicts. That's why they leave. That's true, the conflicts may be brought about by a question. If Christ wasn't resurrected, what about... brother, you shouldn't be asking those things. Well, why not? Well, that indicates you have weak faith. So don't ask them. Sit down. So that may contribute, but that's still an interpersonal problem. That's true. A lot of times the witnesses can't deal with questions, and that's why they leave. But they don't leave because of the questions. They leave because the witnesses can't deal with them, because they get mad, upset, condemn, or they refuse to answer them, or give very, very poor answers. And then there's conflicts, interpersonal conflicts, and that's why they leave. Maybe you can do a survey of your own. Find out why witnesses leave. See if I'm right. See if my survey is correct. So I summarize in one sentence, be Christians to witnesses. Show them love and concern. That's the main thing you can do. Thank you.